We have now an indication that we are working on, that we are hoping very much that we can start clinical trials in patients and in children in particular, in order to relieve the suffer and help them and help their families.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. This episode is powered by J Ventures, a community-driven VC fund in Silicon Valley, in partnership with Lomitech, and sponsored by Homeward Ventures, Hippo Insurance, Upwest, Hillel at Stanford, Leap, and Birthright Excel. Welcome to another episode of 20-Minute Leaders. Today we're going to be talking about medical research, and we welcome Rami Aqeilan. Born in East Jerusalem, Dr. Rami Aqeilan is a full professor of immunology and cancer research at the Hebrew University-Hadassah Medical School in Jerusalem. He began his academic career at the University of Jordan, where he received a B.Sc in biology, followed by a master's and Ph.D. from the Hebrew University-Hadassah Medical School. In 2008, he joined the Faculty of Medicine at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Currently, he is the head of the Institute for Medical Research, Israel, Canada. Rami Aqeilan, welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. How are you?
Good. Thank you, Mikhail.
Thank you very, very much for being here. You were born in East Jerusalem. Now you're a full-time professor of immunology and cancer research at the Hebrew University-Hadassah Medical School. But you've had an incredible journey across a variety of academic institutions. The research that you're doing is fascinating and is obviously, already has made an impact and is continuing to make an impact on people that have, unfortunately, a lot of different illnesses. And so I'm excited to hear a little bit about what drives you and even more excited to hear about, the research that you're doing. And so tell me a little bit about, your own journey and walk me through your life sort of, and what guides you through your different experiences.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you very much for having me first. And it's really a great honor. So as you said, I was born in East Jerusalem, actually in Sheikh Jarrah, and grew up there at high school. I did my bachelor at the University of Jordan. Then joined the Hebrew University as a master and a PhD student working on cancer research. But during my high school, actually in the 10th grade, I got to meet this teacher who made me love biology. And his lessons, I would wait for this lesson all the time to hear and learn new things about the cells, how they function, all these organelles, all these reactions. I loved also chemistry, but biology was just talking to me more. So I decided I want to go and learn more about, life, about what's going on within these cells. And slowly, I was getting more and more interested in mechanisms of diseases, how things get really worry and what really drives them out of this order that is placed in a normal cell.
Now, tell me, Rami, going back to high school, this biology. Now, do you get excited by this because of the teacher style, or is it more the material that really draws you?
Well, actually, the teacher just made the material so exciting. So I think he got just this style that made me really love more and more the material and pushed me to ask more questions and get to be more and more curious. So it is a combination, I would say, but there is always a mean for something, and that was the mean for me to love more of this material.
Okay, so walk me through then your academic career, because you get enticed by this idea of biology and cells and diseases and how it impacts us as humans and any living thing in general. Walk me through a little bit about your academic experience and what draws you more and more into it.
Yeah, so I finished biology and I was really not sure what I'm going to do with this. I love it. I never saw myself as a professor or as an academician, I actually went back to Jerusalem and started working in Kubat Khulim, in one of the medical centers in the old city of Jerusalem, and I hated it. I didn't like this type of work. So, and I was all the time wanting to go back to school, and this is where my father actually pushed me to go and find out about Hebrew, and this is where I first started my master. Then I moved directly to a Ph.D. program, looking at targeted therapy, looking at how we can selectively eliminate cancer cells. It was just fascinating to me. And during this time, I just made up my mind that this is the way to go, and it is not enough. Now I have to go to a postdoc. So this is what we usually do after PhD. And the place to do it is usually abroad. And this is why I chose to go to USA. And there I joined the lab of Carlo Croce, one of the known and famous scientists on cancer genetics. He was in Philadelphia at the Kimmel Cancer Center. I started my postdoc fellowship there in 2002, and moved with him to Ohio State University. At Ohio State, I started my first faculty position, stayed there for 4 years, and, family, home. So we decided to go back and started my job at Hebrew at the same place where I studied my master and PhD. It was very exciting at the medical school, and started my lab. There is a hierarchy and there is a stepwise to build in the university. So I moved from a senior lecturer to associate professor to a full professor. Today, I'm heading actually the Institute for Medical Research Israel, Canada, an institute that has about 100 to 120 principal investigators working on different disciplines in medical research. And I have my own lab, my own research. I would love to tell you more about this if you like.
I am ready for it. But so before you tell me about, your lab and your research, tell me a little bit about, what you studied all these years in as simply as possible so that both I and whoever's listening can understand. Because, immediately, when I'm preparing for a talk like this and I'm thinking about, the work that you're doing, you're talking about, selective cells and cancer and immunology. I immediately think like, wow, this is so complicated. There's no way I'll understand it. So dumb it down for me a little bit. What is it all about?
It's all about what goes wrong. So a normal cell become crazy and cannot be controlled. So this was what interested me, to know what are the very early steps that happens in a normal cell, changing it from this being normal and behaving well to become just so uncontrolled in growth, in behavior, in signaling, in things that it's supposed not to do it. So I was very curious to learn about these very initial steps. What happens to the DNA, our DNA? What regions really are to be affected the first in our DNA in order to make this cell become cancerous? So we studied many. We looked at the microscope on many cells, and we changed some of the DNA of these cells and tried to predict and to prove whether these changes that we think of could really get these cells to be uncontrollable. That was just one aspect. Then, of course, I like to build models, because if you want to study a theme, you need a model for it, and this is applicable to everything. And the models that we do usually in the lab is either animal models, so we use mouse models, for example, to study cancer, or we use other non-animal models, simple or more complicated, based on cell culture, and try to mimic this change that we think of and see what are the consequences of this change that we are introducing on the cell fate or on the whole organism.
And so this is the research that you're doing today, right?
So this is the research. So our research very much look into what we know in the medical field as genome stability and genomic instability that is seen namely in cancer, but now there is also more and more interest to study these changes in other diseases, not necessarily cancerous. And we study these regions in the genome that are called fragile regions. And these, as the name predicts, they are more vulnerable to breaks, to changes, to what we call mutations, and try to look what is really residing in these regions in the genome. There are genes that we know of, and these genes should have a function, should be there for a certain reason. So we try to characterize these genes and to understand their function. And again, we do this in cells, sometimes in sophisticated cells that we design or we reprogram, but also in a whole organism and a whole animal to see if we change this gene that is found in this very specific fragile region in the genome, what would be the consequences on tumor formation, on brain homeostasis? And because, again, as I said, there are so many evidence linking these genes and these mutations with diseases, for example, cancer, but also we recently started to work on childhood epilepsy because of genes that are very important to maintain the homeostasis of the central nervous system. Turned out that many of these genes that are critical for cancer, they also have other functions in other diseases or in other tissues or in other cells. For example, they are critical for type 2 diabetes, or they're critical for the central nervous system. And if they are mutated or there are changes, they can cause epilepsy or Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's, and so on and so on.
That makes sense. And so one of the things that I'm always curious about, first of all, it sounds fascinating. And one of the things that I'm always fascinated on is, outcomes of research, especially in academic institutions, especially in health and medicine. As you're running this lab and you're running this research, much like an entrepreneur needs to, or a CEO needs to, what is sort of how do you measure yourself? How do you measure progress? How are you what is a leader do you do to keep the team focused? And what is sort of the end goal of a research like this?
Yeah. So let's start from the end. And I think what satisfies really a researcher is to have a better understanding of the mechanisms of action of whatever we study. But then I think the most satisfying, at least for me, is really to be able to translate this basic knowledge that we understand to use to benefit the patient. And this is what we call in science translational science or translational medicine. So we study the genes, we study the cells and the mouse and everything on the bench, but eventually we would like to translate to the bed, to the patient. And this is where I see that we are heading in our research, because the knowledge that we have gathered and we have invested to understand is now we are in the phases of translating this to help patients. And I was very lucky to have an excellent group of students and postdocs that really work very hard in the lab and also contribute to the brainstorming of whatever we do, and also explore ways to translate our ideas in order to help the patients. We have now an indication that we are working on, that we are hoping very much that we can start clinical trials in patients and in children in particular, in order to relieve the suffer and help them and help their families. So I think if this is gonna work, I will be extremely, high, satisfied, name it. Like this would be really an excellent achievement for humanity and for science and for scientists.
And how do you deal with the fact, more on a personal level, how do you deal with the fact that it could turn out that the research doesn't work, that you might spend months or years working on something that doesn't materialize into a finding that you hope you would achieve?
Well, this is usually the norm. Actually, the normal situation is that things doesn't work somehow because the models that we build are not perfect. And there is always something else to know or to understand or to discover in order to perfect this model. And it's only a model. So we kind of get used to this. But of course, we never give up because we need to be persistent. And this is something about me also and about, I think, every successful person. You need to be persistent. You need to insist. You need to believe in what you're doing. And by only having these feelings, you can really keep going and try again and troubleshoot and start over and make it work.
Right. And so as a researcher, what type of tools do you use with your team, more on a leadership level to help guide them through this process, both on a professional but also on a personal level?
Well, I think we have an excellent relationship with the team members. It's about having this brainstorming together, mentoring at the different stages of their studies and eventually career. So a lot of meetings, a lot of interaction, social activity, going to conferences, not as much now in the COVID time, but eventually this is somebody that you build from starting as an undergrad, where most of the students start in the lab, but then becoming a graduate, then following them in their future career, becoming postdocs, and eventually also independent researchers. But interaction and talking, brainstorming, mentoring, I think these are all the kind of stuff that we do in order to ensure that the students develop and get to become really next generation leaders.
I love it. So Rami, take me back a little bit, back to biology classes in high school and even before that. It's a gift to know where your passion lies already in high school, and most, I don't believe that most have it. How did this affect your life back then? How did it change the way that you experienced the world, from before you've discovered this field to after?
It is really, it was a journey to go through. And I think to mature through this journey and to realize that this is really what I love. I love to better understand and to be able to make a change, even if it is a small change. I like doing small steps, and I think this is exactly what I went through. So small steps with dedication, with persistence, and you got there. And I think the more that you believe in what you're doing, the more that you will get there, and you will achieve and get to your goals.
I love it.
I'm hoping I addressed your question.
100%. Now, you've touched on this a little bit about where you draw your current inspiration from. Besides the potential impact that you may have with this research, post-clinical trials and everything, what really inspires you in your day-to-day about your work?
I'm inspired by every day by learning something new. So I'm a believer, and I just love to explore the beauty of creation and the beauty of what is going on around us. And every day I like to learn something new, and I'm learning something new. And this really keeps me going on to learn more, to discover more, to help. And seeing, the fruits of what you're doing is always motivation to keep going ahead. So
I love it.
Yeah, I like it. I love it.
And what are a few words that you would use to describe yourself if you had to?
To describe myself. Okay, this is tough, but I don't give up. I like challenges. And, I've been through many challenges in my life. And I think I'm very persistent and spontaneous, I would say. And I love my family. And from there, I also get a lot of energy. My wife and my children, my father, my mother who passed away. So I'm just, a normal kid.
Rami, thank you very, very much. This was inspiring. Best of luck with the research. Best of luck with the clinical trials. And I can't wait to keep in touch and see the progress. And stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much.